Hello and welcome to Hot and Heavy, the Elaine Bennis podcast. I'm your host, Shivani Desai. Today I'll be talking about Season 2, Episode 9, The Deal. How's everyone? I hope everyone's doing well. I have Olympic fever. Yes, it's happened. It happens every time. And I'll watch anything. I'll watch any sport. If they show some sort of backstory about an athlete and some video before they compete in their event, oh my gosh, I will cheer so hard for that person, even though I just heard about them 7 minutes earlier. I really get into it. I have it on every night. My kids are like, can we watch something else? I'm like, absolutely not. Did you see? It's synchronized diving. I mean, come on. But anyway, I have full-on Olympic fever. I'm excited. There's another week yet for it to be a part of my life, and then I'll have to say goodbye until this Winter Olympics in a couple of years. Or I guess next year. Yeah, that's right. It's next year now. All right, I don't have time to talk about the Olympics. I have to talk about this episode. Finally, we get a really great Elaine episode. Probably the first episode that really has everything to do with Elaine. I mean, Elaine and Jerry, but it's super Elaine-centric, and of course, I'm here for it. That being said, it's an interesting episode, and I will get more into that in a couple of minutes, but first, let me read the synopsis from my coffee table book. While channel surfing, Jerry and Elaine stumble across a softcore porn film, which leads the two of them to restart their physical relationship without compromising their friendship. The system deteriorates when Jerry gives Elaine cash for her birthday. Very succinct. This episode was written by Larry David. So it's important to note that this episode was actually shot last in the season. And Larry David wrote this episode thinking it would be a season finale. So while it was in the shooting schedule, in the production schedule, it was shot last, it aired 9th out of the 12 episode season. It's sort of bizarre because there is, and I'll get more into this throughout this episode, but it's like nothing is addressed after what happens at the end of this episode. It's very confusing. And as a fan of the show, I always knew that this was some kind of weird one-off episode that never got resolved. There was never closure. They never addressed the whole thing with Jerry and Elaine ending up together at the end of the episode. I knew that they had never addressed it. But as a fan of the show, I just chalked it up to just some weird anomaly, and they were still not figuring out what they wanted to do with the show, with the relationship in the early seasons. But as I was watching the extras, so the commentary for this episode is done by Jerry Seinfeld and Larry David. And as I was listening to it, they kept referencing this episode as if it were the last one before season 3. And that's what prompted me to look into that. I'm going, wait a second. And then I kind of had a panic moment going like, oh my God, did I miss a bunch of episodes to cover in my own podcast? Am I crazy? Did I just totally skip over the baby shower, the Chinese restaurant, the busboy? But as I dug into it, the production schedule it differs every now and then from the way it aired, but this is probably the most egregious of, I guess, continuity disruptions to the difference between those two schedules. So anyway, when Jerry and Larry were talking about this episode as if it could be not only a season finale, but really a series finale, when they were working on this episode, when Larry David was writing it, he very much thought the show would not get picked up for a third season. It was gaining some steam, but it certainly wasn't a sure thing that they would get a third season. So he wrote this episode with that in mind, saying, hey, okay, you know what? We'll just give them being the NBC executives, namely Warren Littlefield. We'll give them what they want. Here is Jerry and Elaine getting back together. And you know what? It'll be, if it's a series finale, well, then that's how the series ends. If it's a season finale, we have all summer to figure out how to, I guess, break them apart again for the next season. So anyway, when they were saying that during the commentary, I was so confused. And then I figured out, okay, so they actually aired it 9th in the season. And after this episode, as I mentioned earlier, the baby shower, the Chinese restaurant, and the busboy all aired after this episode aired. I really couldn't find the reason why it didn't air as the season finale, why they decided to place it ninth in the running order of the season. And then to end the season with the busboy episode seemed really weird. And I go back to thinking about how we talked about early on, Larry David was very insistent to keep some logical continuity going in the show, which is why he brought back Vanessa, the woman who Jerry is interested in or starts dating in the stakeout, and he brings her back for the stock tip because in Larry David's mind, there's like, we didn't show anything that suggested they broke up, so why wouldn't we bring her back as his girlfriend in a later episode? So this is why it's so vexing to take Jerry's term about the girlfriend who scooped the corn niblets. You know, it's vexing because this is so blatantly against all continuity that I just can't believe. I just wish there was more of an explanation, I guess, as to why they decided not to air this as the season finale. Now, I did find this little tidbit of information. NBC did issue a press release prior to the broadcast of the deal. It stipulated that Jerry and Elaine, quote, will not expect anything more of each other than they did when they were friends. Okay, well, a press release, but still for an audience who I don't think would really be privy or see these press releases, it was probably pretty confusing. All right, so kind of knowing all of that, let's get into the episode. So scene 1, Jerry and Elaine are watching TV. Elaine has the remote. Jerry calls her out on her remote skills. She's going too fast. Stop, slow down. And Elaine mentions guess whose birthday's coming up soon. And then they stumble on the naked station. One thing that I always like that Elaine says, and she does it throughout the series at different points, she says, look it. She goes, hey, look it, naked people. Jerry kind of notices that and says, I don't want to watch this. Been a while. Then they're both remembering the last time they had sex. It was a long time ago for each of them. Jerry's looking at Elaine and sort of lingers a little bit with his eyes. She notices that. She says, what was that look? What look? I know that look. So cute. So they kind of go back and forth about the look, and Elaine says, you got something on your mind? They start talking about the fact that things occur to them, both of them. I mean, there was something they did 37 times. Elaine had kept count. As they get talking about it, it just seems like it makes perfect sense. It's almost stupid if we didn't. Moronic, absurd. I love it so much. This back and forth is fantastic. Now, come on. Some problems might arise if they just wanted to add that to this. And, it'd be devastating if their friendship was affected. So let's just make up some rules. So the rules they come up with: no calls the day after that. Sleeping over is optional. And the kiss goodnight, it's bourgeois. And then the scene ends with both of them rising from the couch, kind of going in opposite directions to meet up at the bedroom slowly. And a perfect little button, Elaine bumps into the shelves. Love it. The purpose of this scene, of course, is our setup scene. Jerry and Elaine make a deal to sleep together without affecting their friendship. Yes. So my overall take, this is one of the best scenes of the entire series. I mean, everything from the writing to the performance, the blocking at the end where they're slowly walking to the bedroom. It's Seinfeld perfection, I have to say. I've watched this scene so many times at different stages of my life, certainly before I'd even kissed a boy to, being in a relationship to maybe having an ex-boyfriend to being I've watched this episode in so many different stages of my life, and I find it so relatable with exes who may still have some residual attraction after they've broken up. I mean, in their minds, they know they cannot work as a couple. They're fine with that. But that doesn't mean that they aren't necessarily attracted to each other sexually. So I think this is a scenario that is pretty relatable. Also, I think a very important element to this entire conversation was that they established they both hadn't had sex in a very long time. That's very important to why this even occurred, why this conversation even happened. They are horny, okay? And they know each other in a sexual way. And look, they're alone in his apartment. They've stumbled on a naked station. This is a perfect recipe for an ex hookup. It just is. And I like that Elaine calls Jerry out after the look. And she won't let him drop it either. I like that she pushes it. So, what about the look? And I love Jerry Seinfeld's performance here. I think it's done really well. You can tell he's a bit embarrassed, but, he feels comfortable enough to open up to her about why he looked at her in that way and that, things occur to him. And this whole thing just felt very natural, very grounded. And we're in this period of the show before it gets, more absurd as far as their interactions go. But I really do appreciate that we have this type of moment. And it's fitting it happened so early. Again, this is before they really found the groove of the show. But this was something that I felt that writing, again, so strong. There's not a lot of movement in the scene. They're just sitting on the couch talking. But that's when the writing is so good. When you can just watch two people sitting and talking and be so engaged and so entertained the entire time. And while later the relationships between everyone, but particularly Jerry and Elaine, don't resemble at all anything in this scene, I'm just glad we got this moment of like grounded emotion that's still really funny. It's honest, but it's hilarious at the same time. And that back and forth discussion, it's so delicious. And you can see them both getting more and more excited as they get deeper into the conversation. And they're getting excited because they're on the same page about how sex shouldn't be such a big deal. So they can foresee, I think, both of them as they're getting more into this conversation and they're more on the same page about what sex should mean, what it shouldn't mean. I think both in the back of their heads are going, oh my God, we're agreeing here. I think we're going to have sex tonight. And I need to have sex because, again, the horniness. It's powerful. Big factor here. And they're almost giddy by the end. And I love Elaine's little bump into the cabinet. It's so great. None of this was played with any kind of flirtatious heat. And I learned through the extras, this was because Larry David intervened during the rehearsals. I guess during the rehearsals for a few days, they were sitting, Jerry and Elaine were blocked to be sitting right next to each other on the couch, like touching each other. And the conversation was being played very flirtatiously and kind of, even physically, they were getting a little bit more cozy with each other. And Larry David intervened and said, that's not working. I'll get more into that later, but needless to say, the way it was played was absolutely perfect. It was really good. But I'll get into more of what Larry David said when he intervened as far as like the blocking and the tone of that scene. Lastly, I want to mention Elaine is wearing one of the most iconic Elaine looks of the series. That red flowery dress, it's almost like a colonial time style a little bit. It's a little boxy at the shoulders, but it's so iconic. Like, look, I am a mega fan, but I've never attended one of those Seinfeld fan events where people dress up. I've never attended one of those, I'll be honest, but I've seen pictures, and this look of Elaine's is definitely the most common one I've seen. This dress, the hair, everything. So I think it just goes to show how iconic this scene is, because it's from this scene that people take that look and say, oh, everyone's going to recognize me as Elaine if I dress up how she was in this scene in particular. So moving on, the next scene is the morning after. Very quick scene. Kramer wants the paper. Then he sees Elaine exit Jerry's bedroom in just Jerry's shirt and his sneakers. I guess her feet were cold. I don't know. And Kramer has a very Kramer reaction and walks out. So the purpose of this scene, we see that Elaine stayed over, something that was optional, and she took that option. And my overall take, it's short and sweet, really just to move the story forward, nothing more. The next scene is in Monk's with Jerry and George. Now, there's no Elaine in this scene, but I do want to discuss it because it's really all about Elaine. They're talking about her and the relationship. So I am going to go into it a little bit. So Jerry drops the bomb. Slept with Elaine last night. George's reaction. Oxygen. I need oxygen. Then he wants details. And Jerry's just not in the mood. He might be getting too mature for details. George is not happy about that. Another iconic kind of George moment where he talks about, you get in the mood. And that's a moment, too, if you look at Jerry Seinfeld's expression, I feel like that's one of those moments he's referenced before where he just feels like an audience member watching this incredible actor delivering lines in just such a perfect way. Because Jason Alexander certainly was doing that with the needing details little monologue. And George is so giddy when Jerry starts telling the details. Where he's sitting together. He's so excited. Jerry's not doing a good job. He says, and somehow we started talking about if we had sex. And George is like, these are really bad details. So, of course, George asks the inevitable question, are you guys back together? And Jerry says, no. We figured out how we can sleep together without it affecting the friendship. Oh, George laughs so hard. He has to get up from the booth. He's like, I can't believe you think that you can actually do this. It cannot be done. What are you talking about? Jerry explains further. He goes through the rules, and George is impressed. But then once he gets to just the second rule, he says, no, you got greedy with this whole sleeping over option. No. Women always want you to sleep over. Jerry's just digging in. He's like, no, I really think you're wrong. And one of my favorite lines, and it's both the way it's written and the way Jason Alexander delivers it. I know less about women than anyone in the world. So great. So the purpose of this scene, we get Jerry's take on the whole thing, and George finds out about their deal and just scoffs at it, just thinks they're living in a fantasy world. My overall take, again, it's one of the best two scenes in this episode, just two of the best scenes in this entire series for me. And Jason Alexander is just a master in this scene. I love how excited he is for Jerry and then how upset he gets about needing details. It's all just wonderfully acted. So just bravo to Jason Alexander. So good. And so George is the voice of reason here. And if Jerry wasn't so blinded by his, I'm going to say it, personal horniness, I mean, he'd see it as well. I think if Jerry wasn't in the deal, he'd see how flawed this deal is. And I love how George is the one that points out that the deal isn't going to work. He's just like, come on, it's not gonna, this is a disaster waiting to happen. We move on to the next scene. It's Elaine's apartment. They've done it again. You can tell Elaine's got a very flowy robe on and Jerry's shirt is untucked. And so I wanted to mention this is the first time seeing Elaine's apartment. It's interesting. Now, we don't know if this is her taste or the roommate's taste, but to me, as I was really taking in the background of this apartment, it just felt so deliberate to make this a woman's apartment. I mean, the sheer amount of flowers, both in vases and as paintings on the wall, it's alarming. I mean, it's just everywhere. The set decoration, according to gender, is very apparent here. But I'm glad we get to see Elaine's apartment. Again, we're opening more doors on Elaine's life, and I really do love it. Jerry goes to eat some of the roommate's cake. Elaine says, don't do it, but he does it anyway. Kind of a jerk move. Then Jerry says he's going to get going. He starts buttoning his shirt. Elaine is clearly annoyed. She's taking it out on that paper towel. And then she takes the paper towel to the bedroom. I'm kind of, okay, I have a dirty mind. I'm sorry, but I'm going, why does she need all that paper towel in there? She grabbed all of it because she was annoyed, but she was already going for it. So clearly she needed some amount of paper towel in that bedroom. And, well, it's gross, but I let my mind wander a little bit there. Sorry. And Jerry points out, look, you said this is optional. And she says, it's my house, my option. And Jerry doesn't think that was a thing, but she says, of course, it has to do with whose apartment it is. They're in the middle of this when Tina walks in, the famed roommate we've heard so much about. Talks about how great an improv class she had. I'm an improviser, and I've dedicated years of my life to improv, and I don't think I could enjoy when improv is mocked or is the butt of a joke more. I do love it, but it deserves to be mocked. These feelings are complicated, I realize, but whenever improv is made fun of, I absolutely love it. And it's clearly like, oh God, she's so annoying. She was to improv class. So Tina is played by Siobhan Fallon. I love her. I've seen her in so many things. I almost forgot how many things I'd seen her in. I looked through IMDb and I was like, oh my, yes, she was in that. Oh my God, she was in that. I've just loved her in everything. She's got that very unique voice, both in the way she speaks, but also she's just memorable every time you see her. Men in Black, I loved her in Men in Black. She's always a scene stealer for me. She was also in SNL, countless things. I couldn't possibly name everything she was in without this episode going into like 3 hours. Everything about her is memorable to me. Even in this scene, she only has a few lines of dialogue, but she definitely leaves such an impression. Every now and then, if something triggers this, like the word excuse or something, I always have to say out loud, sure, I'll excuse you. I just love everything about her, and I wish she was actually in Seinfeld episodes more. She does appear a couple more times, but I really, really wish they had used her more because she's so entertaining. So Tina exits. She excuses them. Jerry starts taking off his shirt and I can't go if you're mad. And then Elaine says, I'm not mad. Really, it's okay. You're sure? Then he leans in for a kiss. And she's like, what are you doing? Rules. The purpose of this scene, we start seeing this deal fall apart a bit. There's chinks in the armor. And, well, look, George was right. It was the sleeping over that was going to break this whole thing up. My overall take on this scene, it's a very typical, I think, sitcom response by Elaine here. It's kind of that whole thing, women get emotionally attached after sex while men don't. This was at least what I was taught by movies and television growing up. The men are the ones that can just leave after sex, and the women are the ones that get just this emotional attachment. I love the performance here. I mean, similar to the taxi confrontation from the stakeout episode, you can see Elaine, she's struggling, whether or not she's justified in her feelings. She certainly, with conviction, she says, my apartment, my option thing. But later, when Jerry offers to stay and she says, I'm not mad, I think she's trying to convince herself. So to me, the whole, I'm not mad, I'm okay, is similar to the stakeout line where she says, so nothing. She's kind of, she's not a totally irrational person. She's having this reaction, but she knows deep down, like, okay, now I'm not really holding up my end of the bargain here. During the commentary, Larry David points that out, in fact. He says, Elaine isn't really holding up her part of the deal. And Jerry Seinfeld just responds and says, well, it is what would happen, though. Now, look, the feminist in me really wants to jump in here and just say, like, oh my gosh, not all women would crumble and react like Elaine did here in this scene and jump down, and kind of not hold up their end of the deal. And not every woman just falls in love every time they have sex. Like, that is totally my knee-jerk reaction a little bit. But I'm also remembering to stay in the world of when this was written and the point of view of the writer, who is Larry David. And he actually says the reason he thought of this storyline was because, in fact, he made a deal like this with a female friend where they tried to do this exact same thing and made up rules. So he's very much writing from firsthand experience, and you write what you know. But look, the feminist in me also wants to defend Elaine here and saying that she has a right to change her mind once the deal is in motion. Look, I mean, they were both definitely on the same page when they made that deal. Again, fueled by horniness, and I stand by that. But one, never knows how they will feel when it comes to an act of intimacy. So I also support Elaine completely for changing her mind. More than just focusing on generalization of like how women versus men would, react to this kind of a deal. I do look at it from a character study as well. So Elaine, look, she's a more emotional person at this point, and Jerry is pretty much devoid of emotion. So character-wise, this makes sense too, and not just assigned to gender. But as the series goes on, those emotions as it relates to gender they all get tossed around. And I think at the end of the day, George is probably the most emotional and sensitive of all of them. And eventually Elaine takes it as a compliment when Kramer calls her a cold, calculated businesswoman. So this is, again, where I just enjoy the evolution of these characters. And the evolution can't be understated. And it's one of the best parts of the show for me. As someone who is trying my own hand at writing, seeing the writers of this show get that footing, for each character. It's helpful to me as someone who's trying to create my own characters and stories. And it's also encouraging that these writers who had never written a sitcom in their lives can make such an amazing show. So it's very encouraging for someone like me who's trying to really get into this world and studying what they did sort of from the beginning and how it evolves. It's just incredibly helpful and almost just like a masterclass for me. I really loved all the performances. JLD playing with her true feelings of being hurt that Jerry isn't staying, to acting fine with it because of the deal. I love that. Jerry knows by the end of the scene that they've crossed a line and things aren't as simple as he thought they'd be. And then Siobhan Fallon as Tina. It's a magical interruption. After hearing so much about Elaine's nightmare roommate, it's wonderful to see who it is and what Elaine's dealing with. And I'll say it again, Siobhan Fallon is a treasure. Just love her. All right, the next scene, there's no Elaine in this scene. They're shopping for Elaine's gift, George and Jerry. But I'll just do a quick recap because I thought it was an entertaining scene. George is suggesting stuff. Jerry is so stressed out. This is after the little spat about staying over. And so it's a very delicate time. Then it's a birthday. And oh my gosh, he doesn't really know what the move is here. And he mentions a bench. Something about a bench. And George is so confused. Well, who puts a bench in their house? I don't know. And George is trying to be helpful. How about a music box? Too relationship-y. How about a frame with a picture of another guy? Candle holders, it's too romantic. Lingerie, too sexual. Waffle maker, too domestic. A bust of Nelson Rockefeller, too gubernatorial. It's a great scene. The next scene, Jerry gives Elaine the gift, and she's so excited. Oh man, just that you remembered means everything. And she opens it. It's a wrapped box that has $182 in cash. Oh, she's so annoyed. Who are you, my uncle? Let me see the card. To a wonderful girl, great pal, and more? Oh, this is just getting worse and worse. You think I'm your pal? And more. I am not your pal. Oh, and Jerry just can't. Why is everyone so down on pal? Kramer walks in, and he sees Elaine. He's got to give her something. Oh, Kramer gives her the bench. She loves it. And a beautiful card with just the most touching Yeats poem you could ever ask for. The card is so beautiful, Elaine gets choked up and gives him a big hug. Oh, love it. And Kramer finds out Jerry had given her cash and mocks him for it. And they need some time alone. And Kramer just says, ooh, the relationship. Then they get to talk and they get real. We used to get along like clams before this deal. Jerry just says we should just forget the whole thing. Elaine's too far gone. She can't. Know this. Know that. Well, what do you want? I want the other. Of course, you're entitled. Who doesn't want the other? And she looks right at him and says, you. To the purpose of this scene, Jerry really screwed up this delicate situation of Elaine's birthday gift. In the middle of this deal, Elaine admits she wants this, that, and the other. And if she can't get all of that, the friendship's over. My overall take, everyone could see this coming. I mean, it was inevitable that this deal wasn't going to work out. Like George said, people have been trying to have their cake and eat it too for centuries. It's very believable to me. This entire scene is so strong. I love that Kramer was the one that got Elaine the bench. I love how excited she was about it. And the moment she read that card, it was both funny and so tender. And Elaine needed that card at that moment because she had just opened Jerry's gift and Jerry's card. And so the timing of the perfection of Kramer's gift and card just made it all the worse for Jerry. Elaine's reaction to the money is so honest. She's at the breaking point with this deal, right? Like we already saw that a couple of scenes ago, and she knows her feelings are counterintuitive to what they had agreed to. And I feel like Julia Louis-Dreyfus plays this with such a hopeful approach. Like maybe like before she opens the gift, she has this hope in her eyes. Like maybe this gift will show Jerry's really on the same page as I am, you know? But when she sees that cash, it's more than a bad gift. It's a real letdown of all these expectations for their relationship. And just the way she delivers Let me see the card. It's just, she knows nothing will redeem a box of cash, but she just needs to see this card to get it over with. She has no hope that it's going to do anything to save the situation. And her snapping at him is coming from that place. I think she just keeps getting worse, from the cash to the sentiment on the card. So the snapping is just her letting all of that out. Well, one moment I need to talk about that I just love. It's just really such fantastic acting. The moment where Elaine says "you" when Jerry asks who wouldn't want the other, she has her eyes on him to register his reaction for a split second, hoping he'll say what she wants to hear. But instead, she just sees him staring straight forward and looking down, and she shuts her eyes in frustration. It's a split second moment. And it's so good. It's almost like an annoyance at herself for feeling this way for a man who she knew he would never reciprocate those feelings. It's so quick, like I said, but it's just such a genius choice by JLD. That performance, I love it. It's just, she's holding out that last bit of hope in that response of saying, well, you don't want that, and hoping maybe he'll say, no, but I really do. And he doesn't. And she just shuts her eyes really tight. And she's so frustrated with herself. Also, I wanted to point out, I love that this conversation is happening while they're sitting on the bench. It's the thing that she wanted, and it's the thing that Jerry didn't give her. So deep. And this is probably, this moment on the bench, this conversation, it's certainly the most tender and heartbreaking moment in the entire series. And it's as serious as it gets for Seinfeld. And, well, I'm sort of glad it's the only one and they didn't have another. It just wouldn't be fitting after this point. But after this, they stay true to the no hugging, no learning. I think that was appropriate. The next scene, again, no Elaine here. It's another scene in Monks with Jerry and George. But just a quick recap here. George points out those birthdays are relationship killers. And I liked the little discussion of like, what is it about sex that just ruins a friendship? Is it the touching? Is it the nudity? I think that's a very valid thing to ask. I think it's all of it, honestly. I think it's the intimacy of it. I think it's just seeing that person in a casual way after that is tough because you just know a lot about that person, in a very private way. So I think there's just something innately that happens. And I'm not trying to be sex negative. I'm very sex positive. I understand people can definitely carry on just physical relationships. I'm not saying that, but I think even for me personally, I'm not sure I could do that. So I kind of relate to Elaine's character here, and also just this fascination with why does it oftentimes ruin a friendship. And then George says, well, it's a breakup by association. I can't see her anymore. Besides, she's already mad at me because I gave her $91. I did like the way the scene took the turn to encouraging Jerry, like, maybe this should be it. And they talk about, what if we bump into her years from now and she's with her husband? Oh gosh, we'd have to kill him, blah, blah, blah. Again, a very real, grounded conversation with a lot of humor mixed in. Such a fantastically written scene. And my overall take, I just love George's point of view here. He really does seem like he wants Jerry to be happy. Jason Alexander plays it so well. Seems like an it. I love the way he delivers that, and I love the way he's looking at Jerry when he says that line. And then moving on to the last scene of the episode. We're in Jerry's apartment. Kramer again wants the paper. And out comes Elaine. And she's got the paper. What are you guys doing today? Oh, this, that, and the other. I liked it better when you two weren't a couple. All right, well, the purpose of this scene, Jerry's given in. He has given Elaine the other. And my overall take, it's very cheesy with Jerry finishing the line and the other, and they're pointing at each other. But at least that was cut with Kramer's comment of liking them better when they weren't a couple. And I guess all I really want to say about this scene is like I cannot watch this scene without thinking of how this was never addressed again. This entire episode was just this weird standalone anomaly and nothing, no closure, nothing. And don't get me wrong, I'm glad they didn't end up together. That's not what I wanted. I didn't want this continuation of it, but a little acknowledgement as to what happened would have been nice. But again, like this whole airing it out of order of the production didn't help it. And I think they were just hoping the audience wouldn't notice. All right, so we're going to take a quick break, and I will see you on the other side.
I came over as soon as I got your text. You okay, bro?
No, bro. Oh, she's so mad.
But that spa gift certificate was the perfect gift, bro. How could she be so mad?
Bro, it wasn't the gift. It was the card. It was the card, bro.
One of the biggest myths ever perpetrated on the American public is that there is a card for every occasion. Every occasion? Come on. You think CVS has a card celebrating the removal of a culturally offensive tribal neck tattoo? Does Target have a section of cards saying, "Sorry for using the last 10-hour maxi pad on your roommate's heavy flow day"? I don't remember seeing Hallmark stocked up on cards conveying the genuine indifference you feel about an ex-lover's podcast. I mean, sure, you could buy a blank card, but come on. You suck at writing. That's why you need Cardians of the Galaxy. We curate the perfect card for the complicated occasions and fucked up relationships in your life. Forget the mass-produced cards that assume way too much about what you want to say. Have Cardians of the Galaxy send a message that's real and painfully specific. Just visit our website, cardiansotg.cards, fill out a brief questionnaire about the person to whom you're giving a card, and we will do the rest. Within days, you'll receive a card that no one else could ever dream of giving to your loved one, enemy, or coworker who won't stop saying, "We having fun yet?" Don't risk ruining another special occasion because you settled for a card that didn't fully encompass all the convoluted facets of your life choices. Choose Cardians of the Galaxy, because to you, every greeting card aisle is a planetary threat. And we're back. Okay, so there is an inside look on the DVDs for this episode. I've got into it a little bit, but Larry David was interviewed and talked about how this episode was really written because NBC was strenuously insisting that they get Jerry and Elaine together. Warren Littlefield wanted this. They wanted stakes in the relationship. And Larry David was really reluctant, really resistant. But then he remembered this scenario from his own life. Like I said earlier, he did try and work out a deal with a female friend of his to just have a physical relationship. So once he got that in his mind and remembered that he had done that, he said, well, okay, then I'll write this episode. Jerry Seinfeld mentions in the inside look how great the opening scene is. And Peter Melman also chimes in to say it is probably the best scene in the history of the show when Jerry and Elaine are on the couch together. Now, going into what I had mentioned earlier about the blocking of the first scene and how Larry David intervened about that, Julia Louis-Dreyfus is interviewed and says that she remembers Larry and Andy Scheinman getting into a lot of arguments about how to play that scene with Jerry and Elaine on the couch. And also the end of the episode, apparently. But specifically to that opening scene, Julia Louis-Dreyfus said, I was, during rehearsals at first, I was playing it really sexually, kind of more flirtatious. And Larry didn't like it. Larry said, no. That Larry said, look, it has to be like you're discussing a contract. It can't be sexual at all. And she said that the night before shooting it, she was so nervous. And apparently she said, I talked to my husband, Brad, as I often did about, what I was working on. And he just, for some reason, he explained it and it clicked and I understood how it needed to be played. And to get more into that, Larry David, he said, look, this cannot read as anything sexual. It's funny because it's discussed in a very sort of clinical way, like a contract negotiation. So take the heat out of it. In fact, they need to be sitting on opposite ends of the couch. They can't be sitting next to each other. And I think we can all agree that was exactly the way it should have been played. And so I loved that background of that where they had been rehearsing it totally differently. And I think naturally people were like, no, we need to build up this heat. I mean, the audience has to feel that they're getting more and more attracted to each other as they're talking about it. And this is where I love these types of stories where, look, Larry David was still very new to this world, new to sitcoms, new to writing this type of material. But and I've heard this quoted, he knew what was funny. Jerry and Larry both would say that, like, look, we might not get all the ins and outs of how this is supposed to work, but we know funny and we know how to put funny out there. And so Larry David, I think, really saved this scene by making sure that it was read as a more contract negotiation tone to it. And nope, they're not touching on the couch. They're sitting on opposite ends of the couch. Those two things just, I don't think that without those two changes of direction, this scene would be anywhere near as iconic as it is. Something else that was discussed in the inside look that I thought was funny, Larry David was talking about, I think it was in between the second and third season. So again, like I said, this episode was meant to be the season finale or series finale, depending on if they got picked up or not. But they knew, but obviously the summer between, they knew that it was being picked up for a third season. And Jerry was on the road, as he always did on the off season. When he wasn't working on the show, he would be on the road doing his stand-up. And he would ask audiences, do you guys want to see Jerry and Elaine get together? And it was a resounding no. I mean, just everyone would say no. And Larry and Jerry, I think, felt very vindicated just knowing these small samples that Jerry was getting on the road saying, no, that would just mess everything up. We like how it is already. So I thought that was a really interesting, dirty survey that was done by Jerry Seinfeld on his stand-up tour. And so the commentary is done by Jerry and Larry, like I mentioned. Jerry Seinfeld really noted, especially in that opening scene, just how everyone was getting so much more comfortable, and it's very apparent in the scene. And comfort is everything. You don't want to watch anything that seems awkward, right? So he was saying how this just felt so much more comfortable. They had just done the commentary on the stakeout right before doing the commentary for the deal. So, they were definitely going from one extreme to the other. So I think that's why Jerry Seinfeld mentioned it. He's like, oh, look, even the apartment looks more lived in. Everything just seems very comfortable, more lived in and just realistic and grounded. So he mentioned that, I think, for that reason, because they just come off doing commentary for the stakeout. Larry David mentioned something that I absolutely loved. He pointed out that scene, that moment where Elaine reads the card. He said, with rehearsals and different takes, that was probably like the 20th time she had read that card. And every time she welled up with tears reading that poem. And he just wanted to point out just how lucky they were to have her on that show, just because of her acting chops. And yeah, I just love that he mentioned that. And then it was so great. At the end, they couldn't believe it. Was so funny. They were so far removed from the episode that at the end, when the credits started rolling, they were like, "We ended it like that? Do we ever talk about why they weren't together in the next episode? I don't get it. I can't believe we ended it like that." It was so surprising. They were absolutely could not believe that they had ended the episode that way. And they'd forgotten that they had ended it that way. I really was waiting for them to be like, okay, so obviously they don't end up together. This is why it aired this way, and this is why. But I was waiting for them to give some kind of an explanation, but instead it was full on going, huh? What? They were together at the end? That's how we ended it? It was hilarious. I was like, wow, even they don't know. Larry wrote the frickin' thing. He doesn't even know why. Oh, I thought that was hilarious. The notes about nothing, the additional rules were revealed. So, and I really liked them. I was kind of sad that they had to be cut for time. So an additional rule, this is how it was presented in the notes about nothing. Weekends could take on a special significance where people feel it's incumbent on them to socialize on a grand scale. All right, this rule is all days are of equal value, no weekend imperative. And when I read that, I was like, oh, okay. When Jerry is asking George in a later episode about whether or not Susan is his girlfriend, he asks about, I believe, Saturday nights, is the date implied or you have to make plans, So I think this echoes that in the whole sense of, okay, there's no weekend imperative. Don't treat a weekend like a time we have to spend together. So then there was an elaboration about why the sleeping over thing needs to be a rule. because the act of sleeping is a separate and sovereign condition in no way affiliated with any other behavior. So this was a little bit more of that kind of contract legalese speak that was in the script that had to be cut for time. And finally, there was another rule where Jerry says, in order not to be confused with them, and them meaning couples, let's not even use their terminology. No darlings, sweethearts, or honeys. And Elaine agrees. She says, in fact, we should impose penalties. $5 for a honey, $10 for a sweetheart, $20 for a darling. And then Jerry adds, and $50 for a public display of affection. Then Elaine asks, is any affection permissible that is not a direct prelude to that? And Jerry firmly replies, I would have to say no. Oh, I loved it all those additional things that had to be cut. So good. Again, it's just that whole tone of it being more of a contract negotiation is what really, really makes it work. Moving on to Contributor Corner. I'll give you one guess as to who contributed this week. If you said Greg, you'd be right. Our great friend to Hot and Heavy, Greg, has once again sent in some thoughts, and let's get into them. First, Greg says, I like that this episode explores the whole dynamics of Elaine and Jerry's relationship, given all we know prior is that they are friends who used to date. This is probably the first time friends with benefits as a relationship has ever been explored in a sitcom. They're both single, they both enjoy sex and haven't had it in a while, and they both don't want the strings attached. They discuss it in such detail, and the creating of the rules show they are both on the same page, which we see later on they actually aren't. I love how matter-of-fact Elaine says, "All right, sir," after the first rule, showing how by the book this will be. Another thing I like is how they never show them in the bedroom at all, so there's no in the heat of the moment talk. This is purely transactional. Elaine coming out in Jerry's shirt the next morning is as sexy as it gets. I love that much of this lead-up conversation is used word for word in the writing of Jerry's show-in-show sitcom later in the series. I specifically think of Mariska Hargitay reading the line, "What was that look? That look you just gave me," from that episode. Yes, okay, I do love that too, Greg. I love everything you said. I'm gonna focus in on the fact that you pointed out that there were no bedroom scenes in this entire episode. And I think that was, again, just the perfect choice. We don't need to see any of that. Next, Greg says, what is with George's shirt in the coffee shop scene? Untucked, unbuttoned. I hate the shirt so much. I am fixated on it during this otherwise hilarious scene between him and Jerry. George takes a back seat in this episode as Jerry's sounding board, and his scenes never include Elaine or Kramer. I like that they did this because it keeps us very aware of Jerry's side of things without knowing until it happens where Elaine stands. Oh my God, it's so funny you said that, Greg, because Jerry Seinfeld points that out in the commentary when George gets up, when he's laughing at Jerry about, oh no, we're going to have sex and it's not going to affect the friendship. When he's laughing and he gets up, I think it was Jerry who said, what's with that shirt? It was something that, yeah, it's really ill-fitting too. It's untucked because I think it's too small. I don't know what was going on with that shirt. I, however, didn't find it so distracting. I don't fixate on it, but I do think it's funny that you pointed it out. And either Jerry, I think it was Jerry, but one of them during the commentary called it out as well. So the next thing Greg says, after the second hookup, this time at Elaine's, the falling out shows the real difference between men and women. There is a whole psychological level to this episode beyond anything done before on the show. George is ultimately correct in his foreshadowing of Elaine being unhappy if Jerry doesn't stay over. I love how Elaine pulls an obscene amount of paper towel off the roll in a hilariously done physical bit. Also, props to Siobhan Fallon for being very funny in her very brief appearance. Yes, that scene was very much the difference between men and women and how they would react. And I already went into that a little bit. And I agree. That's another way of putting it. It's a psychological level beyond what was done before. And agreed on Siobhan Fallon. So incredibly hilarious in a very brief appearance. All right, next, Greg says, while I naturally see things from Jerry's perspective on the whole situation, I can't help but cringe with his gift of cash. Cash is in all caps. Cash is never a gift for anyone that isn't a kid or a couple getting married. Elaine saying, Let me see the card, as if that was going to salvage anything was so funny to me. At this point, I'm on her side, and she has every right to be pissed. I love how Elaine is over the moon about the bench Kramer gets her, to the point of being near tears, and holds up Kramer's card to Jerry as if to say, this is how it's done. It's one thing to act as if the sex is transactional. It's another to make the whole relationship that way. There is nothing more transactional than cash, and she isn't a prostitute. She's one of your best friends. Come on, Jerry. Yes, I love all of that. I never thought of it that way. Yes, nothing is more transactional than cash, and it is very paying the prostitute. What is happening here? The cleaning lady? I don't know. And oh gosh, thank you so much, Greg, for bringing up the sort of dangling of Kramer's card to Jerry and the look on her face. Oh, that is such a great moment. Oh, I'm mad I didn't mention it earlier, but thank you, Greg, for bringing it back to my memory, because that is such there are no words needed. Just, yeah, look at this. Kramer fucking got this right, and you failed miserably. Oh, that's so good. And lastly, Greg says, I didn't remember the end of this episode being Jerry and Elaine resolving this by becoming a couple. To me, this is Jerry giving in to an extreme in order to save the friendship. I need to watch the episode to see where this picks up, because I don't remember them actually ever being a couple on the show. Well, Greg, that's because they never were. Like I got into earlier, this was just not resolved. They meant to resolve it in season 3 because they thought it was a season finale, series finale, perhaps. Yeah, this is just one of those things where it fell off a cliff with this storyline and nothing ever gets discussed about it again. The next episode is the baby shower. And I mean, there is literally nothing ever mentioned about Jerry and Elaine, nothing. And like I said earlier, it's because it was filmed way before this episode. Yeah, so, I mean, Greg, don't bother trying to figure out where this picks up. It picks up nowhere. It's just, this is a standalone, no precursor, no post-cursor. I don't think that's a term. But, yeah, nothing ever gets resolved after the end of this episode where we think that they've become a couple. Thank you so much, Greg. Always great comments. If you would like to become a contributor on Hot and Heavy, please email elainepodcast@gmail.com. That's elainepodcast@gmail.com, and you will get the information on how to become a contributor, and maybe one day you'll have your thoughts read on the show. My favorite Elaine moments, I have to say it's the entire first scene. I love everything about Julia Louis-Dreyfus's performance in that scene. I mean, part of I think why I love this scene so much is you can just tell JLD is having so much fun with the dialogue. And how could you not? It's some of the best writing in any show ever. I mean, just it's so clever and fantastic, brilliant writing. You could just feel this energy within her performance of just how much fun she's having delivering this dialogue. And we know from JLD quotes and interviews that her favorite part of the show from that first audition, in fact, was how the writing was so real and didn't feel formulaic like other sitcoms. And, well, if that's what you love about the show, then what a gift this scene was. So, favorite Elaine moment was that entire first scene. My final notes. This is an entirely Elaine-centric episode, and I was so excited to cover this one. Once I saw it was coming up next, I was like, yes. I loved that even if Elaine wasn't in a scene, she was a central point of the discussion. And George and Kramer have no plots of their own. I mean, and I'm sorry, but it was about time that happened, in my opinion. JLD put in her time, and to have an entire episode kind of dedicated to Elaine and a relationship with Elaine, I was all about it. And George and Kramer not having their own plots, there was no room for it, really. While in other episodes I've expressed, oh God, they could have swapped out some of this storyline to just add some more Elaine storyline. This was, no, I didn't need to see George and Kramer doing anything else except being there for Jerry and kind of supporting what they're doing with Jerry and Elaine. This total bizarro airing of this episode is the 9th episode instead of the season finale. It just makes for such a bizarre continuation for the next 3 episodes. I mean, this is meant to be an episodic show. So for those of you who aren't total sitcom writing nerds or just nerds in general about TV, episodic means when it's a type of show or series where each episode can stand alone without relying on established plot lines from like a previous episode. And then this is opposed to a serial or a serialized show where you better watch it in order so that you can understand what's going on. So like a Simpsons is episodic while Breaking Bad is serialized. So with that in mind, I mean, Seinfeld is totally an episodic series, but with something like two of the main characters getting together, it's not something that even an episodic show could get away with without some kind of a resolution or closure to it. And I really couldn't find any reaction to that in my research as far as audiences being confused or anything and wondering what happened. I think everyone just moved on with a shoulder shrug. I'm sure that's what I did when it aired and I was 12 years old and I just said, all right, whatever, cool. Now Elaine's throwing a baby shower, big deal. So, it just becomes apparent when you look back and you go, hey, what? There's a whole episode where Jerry and Elaine got together in the end and that's how they ended it and then nothing was ever said about it again. In the grand scheme of things, it really doesn't matter. And I think that's all I can say about The Deal. Thank you so much for listening. I was so excited to cover this episode. So much just juicy Elaine stuff in here. And, it's just a fantastic episode all in all. And even though it's a weird standalone kind of bizarre with continuity, it still doesn't take away the fact that it's some of the most brilliant writing and most iconic scenes of the entire series. So just such a fun episode to cover. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.